Hello everybody, Jediwarlock here, and welcome back to another video here on the channel. Today, we are returning to the world of Azeroth for another episode of WoW Rocks, where I examine the geology of some of the most iconic zones in classic WoW. In this episode, we're taking a look at the Howling Fjord, one of two starting zones in Wrath of the Lich King, and home to some very unique geologic features. I'll be taking a look at the general environment of the zone, then highlighting some specific locations as I consider all the evidence to draw some conclusions about how this magnificent zone came to be. So, with all that being said, let's get right into it and explore the world of Warcraft. No matter how you enter the Howling Fjord for the first time, the view is breathtaking. The high cliff walls, concealing massive valleys, contrast with the gentle, sloped wilderness above and the tranquil isles below. The massive fjord Alliance players sail through on their way to Valgard is the namesake of this zone, carving its way down to the frozen sea. Likewise, the Horde entrance via airship presents a sweeping vista of the eastern cliffs near Vengeance Landing, overlooking tide-swept shores already brimming with conflict. Compared to other coastal regions up to this point, such as Darkshore, Ajara, or the Hillsbrad foothills, it's plain to see this zone presents an imposing sight for sailors and adventurers like ourselves. The Dragon Flayer Vrykul, ancient progenitors of Warcraft's humans, call this region home, and their oversized villages define the culture of the Vrykul and convey a sense of trespass by the player. Despite being back on Azeroth after the end of the Burning Crusade, you are still a stranger in a strange land. The towering Utgard Keep, capital of the Vrykul, can be seen from almost anywhere in the zone, and provides a neat centerpiece right at the start of the fjord. Vrykul are prevalent throughout the entire zone, but their allegiance to the Lich King has only worked against their once proud history here. Titan relics are the final main component of this zone, making the Howling Fjord an archaeologist's dream. Apparently, the Dwarven Explorers League has figured this out, as they have several active excavation sites in the area. From the great effort visible along the southern coast to the more concentrated areas on the plateau, the Titans have a history here beyond that of the Vrykul. With the Storm Peaks and the stronghold of Ulduar playing a major role in this expansion, I think it's fitting these little hints and clues start cropping up early on the player's journey. Let's jump right into discussing the geologic history of this zone, starting with the name itself, the Howling Fjord. You might be familiar with the real-life fjords in Canada or Norway, which are undoubtedly where Blizzard drew inspiration from when creating this landscape. But what exactly is a fjord? Essentially, a fjord is an inlet of the sea with tall, steep cliff sides, which we can easily see entering the zone on the Alliance boat. To keep in continuity with Warcraft 3, this area is technically named Daggercat Bay, but since this is a video on geology, I'm gonna stick with fjord. Seeing the exposed rocks looming on either side is a great view, but I bet you're wondering, how did this landmark form to cut an entire zone nearly in two? Utilizing real geology, we know fjords are created in a very specific way: glaciers. Glaciers are large, fluid rivers of ice that carve deep, cliff-like ravines through rock as they flow across land, carrying tons of dirt and debris with them. Apart from the naming convention and the seemingly obvious style of the area, let's also consider evidence we can use to confirm our theory. When looking for signs of glacial activity, we can look for three main things. First, moraines, which are piles of sediment that can form at the end of glaciers. Second, U-shaped valleys, caused by glaciers acting like sandpaper against rock and cutting downward through it over time. And third, glacial erratics, or large stones and boulders discarded along the path of the glacier. While any sediment from moraines was likely washed away into the frozen sea, it does seem the cliffs here are indicative of those U-shaped valleys. More importantly, I was surprised to find dozens of large rocks on the bottom of the channels. A random design choice? Possibly, but it was still nice to find this type of detail placed on the bottom of the fjord. The glacial history of this zone does not stop at the main fjord. Up above, at Lake Caldros, the same pattern forms, and traveling westward reveals another U-shaped valley for quite some time before the river takes you to Whisper Gulch, a stony chasm worn down over eons by wind and water. There are deranged explorers down here who have been corrupted by the voice of Yogg-Saron. And while I was questing there, I just found this dwarf's dissertation on glacial research that is more or less 90% of this video. So, yeah. Whisper Gulch is interesting because it doesn't really follow the rules when it comes to glacial evidence, which could indicate a glacier never reached this far, at least with the data we can access in-game. Instead, the glacier could have stopped further east, with the remainder of the passage being created by meltwater. It's also possible this chasm did not exist during the glacial era, and started to crack open more recently, meaning it could be totally independent of glacial activity. Anyway, we've established that there was at least one glacier, maybe two, flowing out of the Howling Fjord. But what happened to them? When glaciers retreat, the ice melts, but the effects on the land remain, hence why there's still a giant valley in-game, but it's now just filled in with seawater. The Western River is a similar case. The conditions no longer allow for a frozen glacier to exist, but the snowmelt from the northern mountains sustains a large lake and river system heading out of the zone. Glaciers have to get their snow and ice from somewhere, and that somewhere is the accumulation zone, the high elevation part of a glacier where snowfall is prevalent and, more importantly, melting is rare. As the glacier flows downhill away from the source, it begins to enter the ablation zone, where melting and evaporation eventually cause the glacier to reach its limit. As we now know, the glaciers have receded to the far north, to the Storm Peaks and Ice Crown, and something in the environment must have caused the de-icing to occur. You could argue this valley in the north of the zone is actually a small glacier in and of itself, but even if it is much smaller than it used to be. The Vrykul have been alive and kicking since before recorded history began 16,000 Warcraft years ago, meaning they were around, or maybe in hibernation, during the Sundering. Utgard Keep, built right in the path of the glacial flow, probably wasn't around during this ice age, so my theory is that the glaciers probably began receding before 16,000 years ago, allowing the Vrykul to establish their empire in the green, hospitable Howling Fjord that remained. This would give them time to make their villages and their citadel before going into hibernation for over 10,000 years. There are also other forces at play within this zone, such as the sundering, tectonic plates, and more general concepts like erosion, but for today, I wanted to keep things focused and talk about glaciers. As always, if you have further ideas or details you'd like to add, feel free to leave them down in the comments. I recently had the chance to visit the Columbia Ice Field in Canada, and I walked on a real-life glacier, which was incredible, and it inspired me to make this geology video focusing on glaciers. A lot of these amazing geologic features don't have long left, so if you have a chance to visit one, I'd highly recommend you do. It was nothing short of magical. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you learned a bit about the geology of the Howling Fjord in this episode of WoW Rocks. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like, comment down below with your thoughts, subscribe if you're new to join the Jedi Order, and until next time, may the Force be with you.